EPA alone gets more than $40 billion in this bill, including more than $30 billion for so-called disadvantaged communities. What are those? Well, they're not really defined. People who vote for Joe Biden. So what it really means is the EPA is going to spread more identity politics and race hate. Are you sick of that yet?
Okay, so Tucker Carlson is saying that the carve-outs in the Inflation Reduction Act for climate action are going to inspire race hate. Before we show more of that video, let's get into what the bill actually will do for disadvantaged communities. So the White House estimates that the law includes over $60 billion in spending on so-called environmental justice. That includes money to reduce emissions around the United States ports, plant trees in city neighborhoods that are hotter because of past racist housing policies, make electric vehicles more affordable, and install solar panels and make buildings more efficient in low-income neighborhoods. But let's also keep in mind there are some ways this bill could actually hurt Black communities, but that's not something that Tucker Carlson bothered to mention. The Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color Act, which passed alongside the American Rescue Plan, called for $4 billion in loan forgiveness to farmers of color, in addition to providing aid to Black growers. The emergency funding marked the first step in correcting decades of discrimination that farmers faced at the hands of the USDA. Yet the loan forgiveness program has been removed from the inflation measure before any dollars could reach farmers. Still, Tucker Carlson focused on the parts of the bill that will impact poor families. Let's watch that.
The total annual budget of the EPA currently stands at about $10 billion. So this is a lot of money flowing to equity and the disadvantaged. And of course, everything hangs on definition. So who gets to define what disadvantage is, a disadvantaged community? Well, that would be the EPA's administrator, a guy called Michael Regan. This is a guy who's in his late 40s who has never had an actual job in his life. He's never worked for real business of any kind. But he does have priorities, and to give you some sense of what they are, we'll tell you what he told The Daily Show this year, and we're quoting. "Everything I do at EPA is through the lens of environmental justice. Contracting, procurement, air quality, water quality, land management starts with, are we protecting the least among us, those who have lacked political representation and those who have not been at the table for decades," end quote. So really, this is about spreading race hate, as virtually everything they do is. They call it equity. It's not about protecting the environment.
Tucker Carlson's racism becomes very evident because every time he covers this on his show, he ignores how systemic racism has economically impacted Black communities. So let's review some of the ways wealth accumulation has been impeded by systems of oppression in the United States. So there were 246 years of chattel slavery, congressional mismanagement of the Freedom's Savings Bank, which left 61,144 depositors with losses of nearly $3 million in 1874, the violent massacre decimating Tulsa's Greenwood District in 1921, a population of 10,000 that thrived as the epicenter of the African-American business and culture community commonly referred to as Black Wall Street, discriminatory policies through the 20th century, including Jim Crow era's black codes, strictly limiting opportunity in many southern states, the GI Bill, the New Deal's Fair Labor Standards Acts, exemption of domestic agriculture and service occupations, and redlining, just to name a few. So wealth was taken from these communities and opportunities were taken from these communities before they ever had a chance to grow, and we're still seeing the lasting impact of that today. There's a huge gap when it comes to income of white versus Black Americans. In 2019, the median white household held $188,000 in wealth, 7.8 times that of the typical Black household. It is worth noting that levels of average wealth, which are more heavily skewed by households with the greatest amount of wealth, are higher. Rich white households reported average wealth of $983,400, which is 6.9 times that of rich Black households. So pretty shocking that Tucker Carlson has the nerve to say what he says and ignore history and not present the facts for their viewers. And it's definitely the case that most people never confront these facts.
Yeah, so there's a couple different components of this story. I'm just gonna do a quick aside when he said that the EPA administrator had never worked a real job in his life. He's worked in government. Well, so do teachers. They work as teachers, a lot of them their whole lives. And Tucker Carlson would say they never had a real job. By the way, here's more government workers, cops. So they've never had a real job. Firemen have never had a real job, okay? But he puts a picture of a black guy up and says he's never had a job, right? And then he says he's the one doing hate against poor white people. First of all, there's nobody doing hate against white people at all. There's nothing in the bill that punishes white people. That implication is completely fabricated. Okay, now let's get to, well, should there be this money appropriated for these disadvantaged communities? And he thinks that that's outrageous and a racist thing to do. But what he's leaving out is what Jessica just explained. He's leaving out two things. One is what she explained, which is through the history of racism that we've had in this country, not just slavery, not just Jim Crow, not just, hey, 40 acres and a mule, just kidding, we're giving you nothing. But over and over again, systemic discrimination that has robbed African Americans of the ability to collect wealth. And sometimes they would collect wealth, and like in the Tulsa example, oh, you've got a Black Wall Street, people are wealthy now, we'll kill you. And that's how they solved that one. Oh, you can accumulate wealth in your households. In fact, that is the number one way that all Americans accumulate wealth, in their homes, the property values. Oh, we'll redline you, we'll make sure you can't get homes, you can't get mortgages, so you can't accumulate assets. And then when there started an 8-to-1 disadvantage, the Tucker Carlsons of the world go on TV and go, well, what's the big deal? Now they want to even things a little bit, not by discriminating against white people, but by helping African Americans just a tiny bit. After all of those years of discrimination, how dare you? No, you're hating white people if you don't let us keep cheating. And to the Fox News audience, that makes a lot of sense, because they're bathed in entitlement and they think they have a right to have a leg up on you, or maybe 8 legs up on you, as you see the 8-to-1 disparity there. But there's a second issue too, which is actually a lot of minority communities have been targeted for places that create more pollution and industries that create more pollution. So let me tell you about that real quick. According to a 2021 study published in the Journal of Science, Black Americans are exposed to more pollution from every type of source, including industry, agricultural, all manner of vehicles, construction, residential sources, and even emissions from restaurants. People of color more broadly, including Black and Hispanic people and Asian Americans, are exposed to more pollution from nearly every source. And what Tucker Carlson is telling you implicitly in that segment is, good, don't try to fix that. We don't want you fixing it. We want all the pollution going to Black folks. We don't want any kind of compensation, and we want us to keep oppressing them. That's what he just actually told you. Alonzo.
Thank you, Cenk, and thank you for the second point you made. I was wondering if you were going to get to that, about how the dump is built in the Black neighborhood. The electrical, that buzzing tower happens to be next to the Black school, and all these kids get cancer and all that. And here's another thing that happens with this so-called disadvantaged communities. A lot of these poor white communities in the South, they get a factory built where they're making, fan blades for wind turbines or something like that. They get a bunch of jobs. Listen, Tucker, if Black people have it so good, why don't you switch places with us? Why don't you switch with us? Switch with me. Since I have it so good, since everything's stacked in my favor, let's switch, and I can be an idiot on TV spreading fear. It's so interesting this came up, because I just had this conversation with a white woman who's an immigrant from another country. She's very right wing, she's very much a Trumper, and she's one of those that believe, well, I don't have any advantages. And I try to explain to her systematic racism and how families accumulate wealth and inherited wealth. Well, I didn't inherit money, I don't have any of that. They can always play the role of the victim all too well. Unfortunately, Cenk, the truths fall on deaf ears. That's really the problem. The people watching Fox News, they never hear this information, and if they do hear it, they don't believe it. To them, the Tulsa massacre, Black Wall Street, like they just deny that it happened. It's not real to them. It's like Holocaust deniers, where they just deny. 400 years of slavery and the Head Start. We got the fact that my great-grandfather bought a house and started a store, and I inherited that, and your great-grandfather legally wasn't allowed to read. Yeah, that means nothing. That doesn't matter. We're on the same level today, aren't we? It is angering, it is ridiculous. His yell of race hate, it's background noise. To tell you the truth, I feel sorry for you guys working at TYT because you actually have to listen to Tucker Carlson. You have to listen to it on a regular basis. It's the same thing over and over. We are the proud, strong white people who are scared of everything and everyone. I've never seen people so scared of anything even approaching fairness. Tucker Carlson is talking about somebody who doesn't work for a living when his lawyer says that you should not believe. His job is to report, and his lawyer said a person of common sense wouldn't believe him. How's that for not working, Tucker? Who else could be that bad at their job that their lawyer says, well, you don't believe him, do you? I don't know. I'm beyond anger. It's just so ridiculous. I hope this bill works out. I hope that black families and people of color do get some of the jobs and some of the money. What they did to the black farmers was a straight ripoff. White farmers get subsidies you would not believe. This is a criminal thing to do to the black farmers. It is somewhat ironic to take money from black farmers when their ancestors were the slaves that tilled the soil of this country. That's why it's beyond anger, Cenk. It is. I don't have a word. I honestly don't have a word for the ridiculousness of it. And people like Tucker Carlson, I honestly can't listen to. I can hold a conversation, I can hold a debate with someone intelligent who's based in facts. I can't talk to Tucker Carlson, and if you're following him, we got nothing to say.
All right, one last super quick thing. Tucker Carlson inherited the Swanson fortune, and then he says, "Well, we started on an equal footing." What do you mean? Okay, all right. To Alonzo's point, then why don't you give your Swanson fortune to Alonzo, and then we'll have a conversation? Because you say Alonzo's in better shape, right? And you envy him. Okay, you can switch positions by switching wealth. See how that turns out for you. Oh, you don't want to do that. Yeah.
Can I make a quick point again, referring to the brilliance of a comedian? Chris Rock said this a long time ago. He said, there's a white guy in the kitchen who won't trade places with me, and I'm rich.
That's a mic drop. That's that. We're gonna try and get through this next story. Let's watch this.